The top 10 things I will always remember about my dad. Number 1, appreciate and cherish the little things. Growing up, we didn't have much money, but I honestly don't remember a time when my sisters, brother, or I didn't have what we needed. My dad worked hard so my mom could stay home with us. We didn't take elaborate vacations. Instead, we went on trips to visit family in Turbotville, Pennsylvania, or Bergenfield, New Jersey. We also went camping, a lot. And we were not those glam campers using a pop-up or RV. We used a tent. We slept on the ground in sleeping bags, and boy, was it a luxury when our dad finally went to Gleason's in Northampton to get air mattresses. We cooked our food over a campfire. We dealt with sweltering nights laying on top of our sleeping bags and heavy rains requiring trenches to be dug around our tent. Each year, my parents and their very close friends, whom we affectionately called Aunt Nancy and Uncle Craig, would choose a new place of interest to camp, and each of those places were adventures that allowed us to see many parts of this country, and many of these locations had the added bonus of history lesson excursions. We also didn't get whatever we wanted growing up, unless your first name was my brother Donald. We had to earn it. I remember when I was younger, and I wanted a 12-inch black and white TV for my bedroom. My dad said I had to get a job and pay for it myself. So I started delivering the Morning Union newspaper. Had a great route in a section of South Hadley just down the street from where we lived. But my dad refused to let me go walking around in the dark mornings delivering papers by myself. Instead, he got up extra early every single morning before work to drive me around just to make sure I was safe. But I also realized it was his way of spending time with me too, something that wasn't happening as often as I grew older. That paper route time became our version of the Mercer Mayer book, just me and my dad. We talked about stuff every morning. He always took the opportunity to comment on news we heard on the radio, and occasionally he would sing with me. My dad loved Donna Summer and would crank up the radio to listen to Hot Stuff or Bad Girls. And back in the late 70s, Debbie Boone came out with a hit, You Light Up My Life, and I swear it came on the radio like clockwork every single morning, and I'd belt that tune out and Dad sometimes joined in. Now that's a secret I never shared with anyone. So eventually, I earned that 12-inch black and white TV along with a lot of 45s for my record player and 8-track tapes. That paper route, even though I was spoiled with my own private chauffeur, taught me to appreciate what I earned. And when I got married, You Light Up My Life was definitely in the running for our father-daughter dance. You know, those mornings with my dad were great while they lasted, but then someone had to come along and spoil all the fun. Eventually, my sister Mary Louise decided she wanted to earn some money too. So now, there was no more just me and my dad every morning. All of a sudden, Rise and Shine became even earlier so that we could get 2 separate paper routes done each day. Number 2, my dad's nicknames for us. My dad loved to tease us and gave each one of us a nickname growing up. Margaret and I were ever so lucky to have more than one, but only one of us had several doozies. My brother was called Bird because he had a habit of running with his arms stretched out behind him. My sister Margaret was affectionately known as Maggie Pie or Pinky Dink because she was so skinny and loved the color pink. Mary Louise was my dad's pussycat. And then there was me. Well, let's start with a nice nickname first. That would be Pumpkin. But my dad didn't stop there. Nope. He also liked to refer to me as Edeltraut. He actually wanted my mom to agree to it as my birth name. Really? Luckily, it happened to be the name of an old flame of his, so my mom kiboshed that idea. But then Dad decided to really push my buttons one day, and he started calling me Agatha Wartbottom. I can assure you, there are no warts on my bottom. Number 3, my dad's nervous Nelly side. My dad had a lot of anxieties and phobias that we grew very accustomed to dealing with growing up. And right now, he would be sitting in that pew staring at me with a stern look in his eyes saying, Don't you do it, Lisa. But I'm going to poke some fun at my dad right now because he always enjoyed doing the same to others. I will be nice, though, and only talk about 3 of those fears. His fear of thunderstorms, his fear of water, and his fear of heights. Don't get me wrong, personal phobias are no laughing matter. We shouldn't make fun of them, but these stories are certainly funny. Dad hated thunderstorms so much that he had this incredibly annoying habit of unplugging everything in our house when we went to bed or we left. Do you know that growing up, our VCR perpetually blinked at 12 o'clock? He also paced around the house with worry every time there was a thunderstorm. Once, while we were vacationing at Hampton Beach, New Hampshire, We could hear him in the hallway of the condo, pacing back and forth during a bad thunderstorm one night. Dad heard us laughing, peeked his head in the room, and I don't remember who it was, but someone said, "Get back to your pacing, Fred." You know, looking back now, we have a dog named Eli, and we really should have named him Fred, because Eli is also deathly afraid of thunderstorms, and at the faintest sound of thunder, he will get up and walk down our hall into our half bath and close the door behind him to be alone in the dark. And then there was my dad's fear of water. Now let me preface this with saying that my dad never learned to swim, and our parents made sure we all learned to swim at a very early age, but that never stopped him from worrying when we were anywhere near close to a body of water. Which brings me to a story about 3 to 4 years ago when we took my parents to Okaloosa Island in Florida. One afternoon, Greg and I took my mom and dad for a walk along the beach, just to wade in up to our ankles. My mom realized she had left her watch on and was concerned it would get wet, not really sure why, but Greg took it from my mom and told us to wait there and he would be right back. What could possibly go wrong? Well, I'm standing there between my parents in ankle-deep water, and you know how your feet sink down in the sand as the water goes out to the ocean? Well, my mom decided to try and take her foot out of the sand, and she lost her balance. My dad, who had a death grip on my other arm because we were only in ankle-deep water, thought he could reach around and help my mom. Nope, did not work out that way. Both my parents lost their balance, started to fall backwards, and because they were holding on to me, took me out with them. To this day, Greg has never let me forget what kind of scene he was looking at as he returned to us less than a minute later. Let's just say that I'm still waiting for some YouTube footage to appear showing my parents and I flopping around like fish out of water. I still can remember my dad's face. He was so petrified you would have thought it was a man overboard situation in the Atlantic Ocean. This takes me to his serious issue with heights. He would never stand near a window above the second floor. He absolutely hated getting on an elevator. And flying on an airplane? Oh dear. It took a few drinks and a couple Valium when he finally took his first airplane trip to San Francisco to celebrate his 25th wedding anniversary. If we drove over a bridge, he always made it to the center or innermost lane, and you could watch him staring straight ahead while he grasped the steering wheel so hard that it made his fingers turn white. Now, if I were driving over a bridge and he was a passenger in the car, I could always see him out of the corner of my eye, pointing with his finger that I should be moving to that innermost lane whenever we came to a bridge. He didn't say a word, he just kept pointing that finger. So now imagine when our family, on vacation, drove across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel or the Tappan Zee Bridge. Now, we have that combination of water and heights, and that was a blast. Number 4. Dad was a genuine gentleman. My dad was Mr. Gentleman. He always helped everyone. Holding doors, opening car doors, carrying bags, offering help, calling to make sure everything and everyone was okay. He was the epitome of the word. And as kids, we witnessed and watched him be a gentleman with our mom, grandmothers, aunts, neighbors, friends, coworkers, everyone. Even when my dad had to use a walker or eventually a wheelchair, he still tried to open and hold the door for those behind him. One afternoon last year, as we were driving my dad back from an appointment with his neurologist in downtown Cincinnati, my dad blurted out the name Archie Roberts. I looked over at him and said, "What?" He said the name again, and I asked him who that was. My dad replied, he was one of the good guys. I started to ask more questions, and Dad said he went to school with Archie. I asked him what made him think about him, and he replied, "That billboard we passed back there advertising cardiac surgeons." He went on to tell us that Archie was a jock in high school and would come and sit with him at lunch and chat. He said Archie always said hello to him at school and asked him how his day was going, etc. He said he wasn't like the other football players, and he really liked to talk to everyone. In the meantime, Greg was in the back seat looking up who Archie Roberts actually was and discovered that, yes, indeed, Archie graduated from Holyoke High School with my dad and was a star football player in high school who went on to play a little in the NFL, but eventually became a cardiac surgeon. It was one of the few times my dad spoke to me about his youth. But I can tell you this, Dad, you were one of the good guys too. And wherever you are now, Archie Roberts, thank you for befriending my dad, because you left quite an impression on him and he still remembers you 60 years later. Number 5, SPC. I cannot explain this acronym in church, but my dad taught me this phrase, and I use it abundantly. You'll have to ask me about it privately. Number 6, chocolate. I think my sister Mary Louise best describes my dad's love for chocolate. Anything chocolate. It was like the air he breathed. Pretty sure most of his meals in the last several months were nothing but chocolate ice cream, chocolate pudding, or chocolate cake. In fact, my stubborn dad would purse his lips and refuse to open his mouth if he didn't want to eat. On one occasion, he refused almost everything we tried to feed him, but then mustered up enough strength, took a deep breath, and said, "Ice cream." Number 7, gardening. My dad loved to work on his flowers and vegetable gardens. I learned so much from my dad planting all kinds of vegetables and flowers. He actually made me love gardening. It's my happy place. And I find the same kind of joy my dad did working in my yard and around my patio, adding to our yard's landscaping every year. Number 8, Christmas. Christmas was my dad's favorite holiday, and there are 3 things that will always remind me of my dad at Christmas time. Our Christmas village. My grandma and grandpa Goehring always had a village under their Christmas tree. We always had one under our tree growing up, and I also have kept that tradition going with my own kids. Christmas Eve services and the beautiful ceramic nativity scene that he painted and is displayed here at church every Christmas season. And the 3rd thing I'll remember about Christmas is Dad keeping our Christmas tree up until Valentine's Day. One time we thought it would be there on St. Patrick's Day, and we used to tease my dad that we needed to decorate it with hearts or shamrocks. He just did not want to ever take it down. This past Christmas, we were so fortunate and blessed to be able to have our entire family together in Ohio to spend it with our dad and mom. When asked what his favorite part about Christmas was, my dad replied, "Just everybody being together and happy." I will forever be grateful for that time we shared this past December. It honestly was one of the best Christmases I can remember in a very long time. And spending it together for one last time was truly the most meaningful gift we could give him. On a side note, our dad loved Christmas so much that he insisted that a Christmas song be played during his funeral. So during communion, Dad, you'll get your wish and we will listen to one of your favorite Christmas songs, Silent Night. Number 9, church. The church, especially this church, St. Peter's. It was such a big part of my dad's life. He met our mom at First Lutheran Church's Walter League when they were teenagers. His dad, our grandfather, was the church organist for years at First Lutheran. My dad involved himself in everything that was St. Peter's and was a founding member, served as church president and chairperson of elders. In fact, his relationship with God was so important to him that he started planning his own funeral 2 years ago. I can still see him sitting at his dining room table with his red hymnal, writing things down. It was so important for him to have everything picked out, and he did just that. Please know that everything about today was handpicked by my dad. Well, almost everything. He provided us with a list of 27 of his favorite hymns to choose from. And for those of you who have seen his handwriting in the past, it was like deciphering hieroglyphics. But we figured it out. He insisted that Psalm 23 be read, that there was communion, and that the Lord's Prayer be read in the traditional version. And he thoughtfully chose the various prayer options of the funeral service. Coming home and having his funeral service at St. Peter's Lutheran Church was not negotiable. Well, Dad, you are home. And the final thing I always remember about my dad is family. My dad loved his family, and this is no overstatement. Family was so very important to him, and he instilled that in all of us at a very early age. He taught us that family matters above anything. As for our immediate family, it was no secret how my dad felt about my brothers, sisters, and me.
He never missed a chance to show or tell us how proud he was of each of us. He loved his grandchildren with such fierce pride and joy. One of the things that stood out to me as we were looking at so many pictures these past few weeks was how often my dad got down on the floor, and not just us when we were little, but how often he got down on his hands and knees and played with his grandkids or had the bile on his back. He was a hands-on dad and grandfather. He got involved in everything we did as kids, and when it came to his grandkids, he was the first to offer to help babysit or drive them to a practice or activity. As for her mother, he loved and treated her like a queen. He literally did everything for her, and all he worried about up until the time he could no longer talk was to make sure Mom was taken care of. Her happiness was all that mattered. And my dad, he was able to muster up enough strength to celebrate their 58 years of marriage with a small celebration on April 11th of this year. Watching my mom hold his hand and sit by his bedside this past month has been difficult. But how fortunate were we to have God give them to us as our parents and grandparents. They were incredible role models of the sacrament of marriage. And as for family events, we did not miss family events. Sundays we spent at my grandma and grandpa Goehring's house. We would go there after church and have Sunday dinner. Our Papa used to play the organ, or we would watch the Red Sox if they were playing on TV, or play with the red and white Lego bricks with our dad on the floor. During the week, we spent time with my mom's side of the family, and holidays were always a big deal. Dad loved to plan for all the family gatherings, weddings, holidays, and picnics. His face would just beam with excitement as he looked forward to seeing everyone at our annual Goehring family picnic at Look Park at the end of June, or celebrating a niece or nephew's wedding, shopping for food for a Christmas Eve or Thanksgiving Day feast. Dad was the youngest and the last of the 5 Goehring brothers. My uncles and Dad were always up to no good, always pulling a prank or sharing an inappropriate joke. My dad talked about each of his brothers constantly. In fact, in the months before he died, my dad would tell me how Uncle Bob, Uncle Ted, Uncle Dick, or Uncle Glenn stopped by to visit him. He had very vivid conversations with each of them, and in the end just kept asking me if he could go back home to his parents' house and see them. It is a strange feeling to know that none of the Goehring boys are amongst us anymore, but my heart tells me that they're still up to no good and probably planning some elaborate ruse. On the morning of my dad's passing, I was sitting by his bedside watching the birds feverishly eat the birdseed from 2 bird feeders that hung from a wrought iron shepherd's hook outside his window. I'm not sure how any of you feel about signs, but this is what I witnessed that morning. There had been many types of birds at those feeders, but there were 2 common types of birds we never saw there for some reason, blue jays and cardinals. But around 11:30 a.m., a female cardinal landed on the top of the shepherd's hook. She didn't attempt to eat any of the seed. She just sat there perched on the shepherd's hook, looking into my dad's room. About 30 seconds later, a male cardinal landed right beside her. The 2 of them just sat there staring into the room. And about 30 to 40 seconds later, they both took off in flight together in the same direction. I don't know about you, but I see cardinals all the time, but I've never seen a male and a female cardinal sitting side by side like that. I've only seen that in pictures. My heart tells me that these were my grandparents, and they were telling Fred it was time to go home. About an hour after they flew away, my dad took his last breath. So these are my top 10 things I'll always remember about my dad, and today's funeral service takes me back to the day where my dad's final chapter in this story began, June 23rd, 2016. Greg and I and Matthew took my parents to Newport, Rhode Island for several days to celebrate both of their June birthdays. June 23rd happens to be my mom's birthday. And on that specific day, we went on a tour of those beautiful Newport mansions along the coastline. It was a beautiful day, but I remember most about that day was that it was the beginning of my dad's final chapter. While we were touring the second mansion, my dad grabbed my arm and asked me if we could go outside, that he needed to sit down for a bit. I remember looking at him with some concern. This was definitely not something my dad would do, and I asked my husband to continue the tour with my mom, and then I was going to head outside with my dad to get some air. We found a bench outside, and I asked my dad what was wrong. He then proceeded to share that he didn't know, that he just knew things were changing and he couldn't explain it. Things just didn't feel right to him. Everything he did felt off. Everything. And I could tell how worried he was about it. I assured my dad that there was a logical explanation and that we would make some calls to get a doctor's appointment and figure it out. Then we just sat there and I held his hand, listening to the ocean and the sounds of people around us, waiting for my mom, Greg, and Matthew to appear. What I didn't know at that very moment was that this was the beginning of a long, almost 6 years to the day, journey and constant struggle with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. As you know, that journey took my dad to Cincinnati, Ohio in November of 2017, where he was able to have access to some incredible cutting-edge treatments at the UC Gardner Neuroscience Institute. I will forever be grateful for the kind, authentic care he received from his neurologist, Dr. Alberto Espe. He was always honest and upfront with my dad about what to expect, or told him if he just didn't have any answers, as much of Parkinson's remains a mystery. What I'll always remember is an exchange between my dad and Dr. Espe during my dad's doctor's visit in November of 2021. Dr. Espe explained to my dad that he felt he was entering the final stages of Parkinson's. He thanked my dad for allowing him the privilege of being his doctor and gave him a huge, long hug. They were saying their goodbyes because both understood that their journey together as doctor-patient was nearing its end. The compassion Dr. Espe showed my dad was real, raw, and rare. Like Dr. Espe, these past 6 years had him cross paths with some incredible doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, nurses, and caregivers, etc. There are just too many names, but there were a handful that stood out and directly impacted my dad in ways I don't think they ever understood. And I know my dad would want them to know how much he truly appreciated everything they did for him. Rodney, Rindy, Kaylee, Jordan, Dee, Tony, Doug, who taught my dad how to box, Tish, Camby, Kevin, Karen, Dr. Jordan, Diana, Kelly, Sarah, Mike, Corinne, Gina, Frederick, and Shannon, thank you. Thank you. To the Hospice of Cincinnati, especially Kay, Maria, Chaplain John, Laura, and Connie, thank you for seeing my dad through these last 7 months. But most importantly, thank you, Belle. You are an angel sent to us from God, and you cared for and loved our dad and mom like they were your own for the past year. You are and always will be a part of our family. Speaking of Belle, just one more quick funny story about one of the millions of interactions between she and my dad. My dad would have what we fondly called sleepy days. Dad's body would just shut down and he would become rip and wrinkle. Parkinson's was such a constant battle, and his body would just get so tired from fighting every day that in the beginning, sleepy days would last 24 hours at a time. But eventually they became longer. One Friday afternoon, my father fell asleep, and he didn't wake up for 3 days. On Monday afternoon, he sat up in bed, looked over at Belle, and was very irritated and said to her, "Why didn't you wake me up?" Belle laughed and said, "Mr. Fred, we have been trying to wake you up for 3 days." Well, last week, I realized that the journey I took with my dad as he struggled with Parkinson's, well, it began and ended the same way, as I sat at his bedside holding his hand as he took his last breath. Dad, we love you. We are so proud of you, and we are going to miss you immensely. It will be hard to fill the emptiness your death has left on each of us, but know that Mom is in good hands, family above all else. You taught us that, and your life, Your story was a job very well done.
Tell me, what does it look like in heaven? Is it peaceful? Is it free like they say? Does the sun shine bright forever? Have your fears and your pain gone away? 'Cause here on earth it feels like everything good is missing since you left. And here on earth everything's different. There's an emptiness. Oh, I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir, and I hope the angels know what they have. I bet it's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. So tell me, what do you do in heaven? Are your days filled with love and light? Is there music? Is there art and adventure? Tell me, are you happy? Are you more alive? 'Cause here on earth it feels like everything good is missing since you left. And here on earth everything's different. There's an emptiness. Oh, I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir, and I hope the angels know what they have. I bet it's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. Since you arrived. I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir, and I hope the angels know what they have. I bet it's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. Since you arrived. Does it look like in heaven? Is it peaceful? Is it free like they say?
Who can say for certain? Maybe you're still here. I feel you all around me. Your memory so clear. Deep in the stillness, I can hear you speak. You're still an inspiration. Can it be that you are mine? Forever love, and you are watching over up above. Fly me up to where you are beyond the distant star. I wish upon tonight to see you smile, if only for a while to know you're there. A breath away is not far to where you are. Are you gently sleeping here inside my dream? And isn't faith believing all power can't be seen? As my heart holds you just one beat away, I cherish all you gave me every day. 'Cause you are